morning. Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Lorene Tanaka. We are here today with Dr. Panos Prevedoras. He is a civil engineering professor with the University of Hawaii. Thank you so much for joining us, Panos.
My pleasure.
Now, there is some controversy about fossil fuels. Could you share your views by first explaining what fossil fuels are and how we use it here in Hawaii?
Well, basically, fossil fuels are carbon-based substances that we find buried inside the earth. Mother Earth essentially prepared them for us. They're essentially old forests, and they have been transformed into what we recognize as oil, also as coal. And during the process also, there is something that a lot of gas is generated that we call also natural gas. So the basic three forms of fossil fuels are oil, coal, and natural gas. One big advantage that they have is that in engineering terms, it's called energy density. A small quantity of oil gives you a lot of energy to do a lot of things.
Because it is dense.
It is, well, it has the thermal content in it is very, very dense. And it started from the ancient times when people realized that, burning wood creates substantial amount of heat, enough to warm a cave, to cook food, etc. In fact, it goes all the way, the fossil fuels, etc., is what made people so far advanced than animals, because we learned to cook our food, consolidate the proteins, develop a big brain, and become who we are. So we should be thankful of fossil fuels, but the reality of it is that they have two big negatives. One, they pollute. So even if they don't believe in the global warming, having a lot of soot in your city is not a good thing. And a prime place right now is the big cities in China, where people go and, you have big problems and all. If you're a local, you kind of adjust because the bodies are adjustable. But for tourists, it is very difficult. I remember,
you can see the air is so thick.
I visited them in 2008, months before the Summer Olympics in Beijing. And they had stopped all the power plants to make sure that the air cleans for the Olympics. Now they're back to their necessary habits, so it is very polluting. So that's the first negative. The second negative is that they are non-renewable. You use it, you lose it. So at some point we're running out. There is no exact predictions of how much oil is under the oceans, under big depths and all, but the easy to get, it's pretty much nearly exhausted. In other words, it has a life of decades, the easily accessible coal and oil. Now, the United States in the last 5-6 years, thanks to a Greek, by the way, chemical engineer, he was able to develop fracking, which is hydraulic fracturing, a way of injecting high-pressure water into rock, subterranean rock, and get all that natural gas free. So we are in a very advantageous situation now. United States economy is booming in big part because of the abundance of energy and the cheap price of natural gas. So there are positives and negatives. Right now there is no substitutes. If you want to have intercity buses, if you want to have buses, if you want to have long-distance transportation, you cannot really depend on electricity. You need to have diesel buses. You cannot have, for example, Hawaii is so dependent on transportation from Asia and from the mainland. Boats, they can only burn, you cannot have a boat. I mean, we're joking here, but you cannot have a boat with solar panels.
Right.
You have to have bunker fuel, which is essentially a low-grade distillate of the oil process. So our economy, our lifestyle depends a lot on fossil fuels. And in fact, nationwide, for better or worse, our energy production is over 90% fossil-based. Again, oil, coal,
but you said fossil base is limited.
Yes, that's a big thing. And actually, we literally today we pay the price of that limitation because, number one, there is competition. The world is growing. India and China, they have high levels of population growth, so they are competing for limited resources. And unfortunately, the price of oil that for many years, except for a few crises, it was fairly steady at $20 or $30 per barrel. Everybody was happy. Gasoline was 99 cents to $1.25. Oh, gone are those times, right?
But are we not still for lack of a better word, mining or searching for oil?
Oh, very much.
We are, okay.
Well, this is actually the silver lining in the process. So the price of oil went from $30 to say $100 a barrel, which is roughly what the price is these days. At $100 per barrel, those big oil companies can afford to spend a lot of money to find difficult to find reserves of oil. In the old times that it was only $30, well, I cannot spend $50
Right.
to sell it to you for 30. I can spend 50, sell it to you for 100. It's good. For example, Canada knew for many, many, many years that they have, tar soils.
Oh, right.
Essentially, they're tar sands. I'm sorry. It's sands, huge expanses of sand mixed with oil. That one is an extremely intensive process to get the sand on the side and take the oil. You have to heat it, essentially, you have to boil it, clean it, collect the oil from the top, let the sand sink, etc. Very energy intensive process, very expensive process. But at $80 to $100 per barrel,
They can do it.
it became profitable, and now Canada actually, that was a recent statistic I read, Canada is feeding us 60% of our imported oil. It's not the Arabic nations anymore. Canada is our major supplier. The rest of the 40% is mostly a little bit Arabic oil, a little bit Indonesian, and then the rest is Alaska and domestic, like
So we do not
Texas.
have those type of tar and sand mixture here in America?
Not in the mainland, no, we don't. It's up in the north, actually. It's very under frozen lanes sometimes. It's extremely difficult to extract it, but it does. They do it now because it pays to do it. The price of oil is high enough to justify doing this. Another thing is oil exploration at very high depths outside Argentina and Brazil. And in fact, if you recall from Margaret Thatcher's time, that dispute with the Falkland Islands, it's not about the 300 people that live in the Falklands.
It's about the oil.
Territorial rights for, that's right, the oil fields that they are underneath. Yeah. So now actually
there's kind of a misnomer. A lot of people still think we're getting a lot of the oil supplies from the Arabian countries or Arabic countries, but it's not. You said
that
it's
was very
Canada.
much 80s and 90s. It has gradually switched significantly since those times, yes. And part of the reason is actually it's far more economical for Asia to get it from there and for us to get it from more local sources because transportation is much cheaper, yes.
Closer. Wow.
Yeah, and for example, Hawaii is one of the few places that we do get direct shipments from Indonesia. Again, proximity.
What are the types of industries that are still utilizing fossil fuels?
Many industries very heavily because again of the density of it is every time you need heat for anything to produce anything, you use primarily coal.
So steel mills.
Oil, that's right. Oil is very expensive. So steel mills, other manufacturing processes, anything that requires heat, they typically use oil, unless it's small quantities, at which point they use electricity, which electricity on the mainland is in large extent based on coal. Okay. Yeah. Actually, Hawaii is the only oddity because we're so far from resources. Coal doesn't have a lot of energy density. In the old times, we decided to focus in electricity production from oil. This made sense when the oil was $30 a barrel. At $100 a barrel, we're all suffering because our $100 bill has become $300 bill.
So can we here in Hawaii use coal to produce electricity? We are doing that now.
The AES plant in Barbers Point produces roughly 15% of our daily consumption on Oahu, and that's mostly coal, and sometimes they can burn similar things such as car tires in very small amount. About 1% can be mixed about other burnables, and you can burn it there, yes.
So in burning coal, does that pollute the air?
Not in the air we breathe. It creates a lot of pollution, but now, all these power producing factories, including the H power plant, which burns trash, 1/3 of the plant is the burning and electricity production. 2/3 of the plant is filters. So basically, all these plants, they say that the air that you breathe near the plant is cleaner than a busy road such as the Pali Highway. So all these scrubbers can
because
do
the
this.
filters are right there.
That's right. It's an EPA requirement. It's not like, it is the law of the land. So you cannot really shoot dirt up in the air unless you have, for a small period, an extreme technical problem. But for normal conditions, the air is practically clean.
So where else are we using coal here in Hawaii? Or
No,
any
I
other
don't
type of
think-
fossil
no.
fuels?
I think the outer islands, nobody has coal. It's all oil or renewables.
Okay.
Yeah, and we don't have any nuclear, which is something we have in fairly large, over 10% on the mainland. Nuclear power plants are very good for large areas because they do not scale down. So a nuclear power plant is really not a possibility for
a
our
smaller
place
area.
because for starters you have to have at least 2-3 million people in demand to begin to justify it, and then you have a slew of problems about where to locate it and protections, etc. But you need to have a critical mass.
We have a couple more minutes. What else can you tell us about fossil fuels that we should know, the viewers should know?
Well, the most critical thing is that we are very dependent on them. 99 out of 100 cars that are still in circulation, they burn gasoline, diesel, or something similar. So it is okay to say, let's make a plan to wean ourselves out of these fuels because they're running out.
Yes.
But we have to be careful because none of this will happen tomorrow, regardless of who is president and what the philosophy is. Practically, we cannot switch overnight into electric cars or I don't know what other technology. This change will take a significant amount of time. So we are stuck with them because our entire economy runs on them. And particularly places like Hawaii that they are so dependent on jet travel and navigation.
Yes.
There is no substitute for this point. You and I can buy it. You cannot buy a solar aircraft. There is no such thing. So how are we going to get our tourists? How are we going to go to the mainland to do business or anything? So there are limiting factors, and unfortunately, for quite a while, we will be dependent on fossil fuels.
But that does not prevent us from planning for the future.
Absolutely. Actually, my personal disagreement a little bit with the planning is not for the planning. We definitely need to plan. Is the political demarcation of quotas. For example, in Hawaii and a few other places, we have by the year 2040, we have to have 40% renewable. Wait a minute, that was not really an engineering study.
And that's, let me just interrupt just a bit.